Kathy Hamre, who I met at one of Betsy's workshops and have followed her work since then. I think a lot of you saw her book in the Millennium Box of Books, where she gave us a taste of what she's going to talk about tonight, which is her 6 months traveling in Southeast Asia and the different paper makers she visited. So, Kathy Hamre.
Okay. I did take a year or a 6-month leave from my work with the Government of Canada to go traveling. And one of the things that I'd always wanted to do was travel around. I'd love to go to Japan and travel around and visit paper makers, but since I wasn't able to do that, I tried to do that in Southeast Asia. And prior to going there, I had been involved, I've been making paper, Western style paper since about, 1994, 95. Sort of starting out with my blender and a small mold and decal, and getting larger and larger depending on what I was able to acquire for equipment. So it's an area that I've been interested in quite a bit, and I haven't been using very much of that handmade paper in binding because I don't have presses of sufficient weight to be able to press the paper. It's all water leaf paper. It's not sized very substantially. It's not particularly good for binding. I've done some artist books with it, but not a lot of that. I'd like to be able to go into larger sheets, and the style of sheet formation that's used in Southeast Asia gives an opportunity for a person who is trying to make paper single-handedly to form sheets that are of quite a large size without a lot of fancy equipment and without the expensive kind of molds and decals that are used in Japan. So I was very interested in the process. I tried to do a lot of research before going, and on the internet checked with other people who were making paper to find out, where were places to visit. And the other thing I did was this is Betsy's copy of the Koretsky's book on the gold beaters of Mandalay, but it's basically the story of their travels in Southeast Asia, visiting paper makers and finding out about the paper that is used in the production and formation of gold leaf. So I brought it along tonight in case people don't know about it. So in 1999, we traveled, my partner and I traveled between January and June. We left here actually on Boxing Day and traveled around Southeast Asia. We went first to the Philippines, where we were not able to get to any of the paper making places. There are a number of people making paper there, but we were not able to get there. We had a very short time there, and we were visiting friends, so our focus was more on spending time with our friends rather than going around other places, but we'll do that some other time. From there we went quickly to Singapore, got some visas, and proceeded into Burma or Myanmar. And that's where we start. And Ellen, if you can just hit the switch on the very back of that machine over there, all the way to the top. And we can have some lights off, probably let's see, at least the front ones should come off. No, it's all or nothing, I guess. Oh, how's that for? No, I'm okay. I don't need very much. So.
I think it's clearer. Can you read?
Yeah, I don't need to. Yeah, I don't really need to read. This is just my crutch. I can just talk to the slides. So this is Yangon, the capital of Myanmar. And this is a typical street scene in Yangon. We're actually standing in the central market. It's a two-level market, so we're on the sort of upper level balcony, sort of looking down the street. We had walked up the next street over, which was the street of all the printers and bookbinders. We're just a street over from this. So lots of paper and stuff out around. Mostly in Myanmar, paper is fairly poor quality. It's in some places they're making paper with paper mulberry, but what they are using for printing is probably what we would consider equivalent to a light construction paper or newsprinty kind of stuff. So it's fairly poor quality that's used for any commercial purposes. From Yangon, we traveled, or actually this is in Yangon, and this is Shelagh Pagoda, which is the largest and most revered Buddhist pagoda, Buddhist temple in Burma. And it was during the time that we were there, and actually for quite some time prior to our arrival, it's been covered in bamboo mats. So these are all bamboo mats over top of scaffolding, because they're putting new gold leaf on the on the stupa itself. So the temple itself is being covered with gold leaf, and in order to reduce the amount of breeze which causes the gold leaf to fly around all over the place, they cover the whole thing with this bamboo matting and work underneath that. So we didn't actually ever get to see it in its splendid glory. But it gives an idea of the importance of gold leaf in the culture. Lots of the stupas are painted gold. Lots of them contain actual gold leaf on the stupas as well. And this is an enormous, it takes up most of a city block. It's up on a hill, and you climb up hundreds of steps from the 4 different sides to get up to this platform level where the stupa is. Lots of temples and various family shrines. From there we traveled to Pagan, which is a cultural area of quite significance. It was the original religious center of the Buddhist culture in Myanmar, and the area of about 200 square miles is riddled with thousands and thousands of temples. There is a philosophy, or there was a philosophy at the time that the more you gave to honor Buddha, the more merit you gained, and therefore you were, getting closer to enlightenment. So all of the princes would try and outdo each other in how many temples they could build. And we visited a great many of them. But you can see the use of gold here as well on the temples. Here's another view of the sort of the area around. And Shelagh Pagoda doesn't have as much decoration on the temple. It's a much smoother stupa than this one. This one's got a lot of relief and decoration. The other thing that happens all over in all of these temples, and even the ones that were quite run down and more of an archaeological preserve, many of them still have a Buddha inside them. They are still used as places of worship. And people still go and pray to Buddha and leave offerings and that kind of thing. The other thing that individuals will do is purchase tiny packets of gold leaf, and I've got a couple of them up here, and apply the gold leaf to a portion of Buddha's body. So if you have a sore arm or a problem with your arm, you might apply the gold leaf to Buddha's arm and then pray to Buddha that your arm gets better. So on many of the Buddha shrines, we saw bits of gold leaf stuck to Buddha as a way of people asking for things to be healed. So in some of those temples, there's actually a lot of trash laying around, and some of the trash was the little bits of paper that the gold leaf comes on, that it's sold with. And so I gathered up a few of those because I wanted to try and find the people that were making paper. And I thought if I had some examples of paper, I might have a better luck, because I don't speak very much Burmese, and most of them don't speak very much English. So wandering through the streets with my little piece of paper, trying to find the paper makers, I got sent to the gold beaters, because that little piece of paper is what the gold came on, and they assumed that I was looking for the place to get the gold. So they sent me to the gold beaters. And this is in the sort of a little closed no air movement room, where the young women are separating the gold from the leaves that it's been beaten on. You can see them to the right of the young woman in the black and yellow shirt. That's a stack of bamboo paper, burnished bamboo paper, on which the gold is beaten. So they put little pieces of the gold, little chunks about the size and thickness of a fingernail, of your little fingernail, onto pieces of this bamboo paper, and then it's bundled up in a package has rice paper wrapped on the outside of it. It's put into a leather pouch, and then it is pounded by young men with big muscles who pound it for 3 days. 1 hour on, 1 hour off. There's 2 of them, work on each packet. They pound for an hour, they rest for an hour, the other one pounds for an hour while the first one's resting. And they do that for 3 days in successive, actually they start off with a small packet and then move to a larger packet. But it takes 3 days to pound the leaf to the thinness that it needs to be for them to sell. And then these young women slice it and put it into the smaller packets that are sold in the temples. So after a bit of time, the man who owned this particular gold house could speak a very small amount of English. And after some conversation with him and sort of probing, I bought a few sheets of their paper and things like that. And he was able to tell me that there was somebody making this bamboo paper in Mandalay. This is in Mandalay, but he couldn't tell me exactly where, so we had to go again in search. And we did find these people after about 3 hours of wandering up and down various streets, trying to find them and showing them this time the actual bamboo paper. We were able to find somebody who knew where they lived, and this is the home of Da Tithi. She and her sisters, she's an elderly woman, she and her sisters and her nieces run this paper-making business. And these are the crocks in which the bamboo is retted for 3 years in order for it to be sufficiently decomposed to be able to cook it and then beat it into pulp. They weren't beating any pulp the day that we were there, but she had some pulp that was already beaten, and so this is Da Tithi, and she is doing a little demonstration for us. This is her mold. It's made out of wood with cotton muslin screen on it, which you might be able to see later, and she's got it in a concrete vat that's about 4 inches deep, and the tray fits inside there. There was about 1 inch of water in the bottom, and she's wedged it down with these wooden wedges to hold it down into the water so it doesn't float. Then she's taken the pulp, stirred it with some water, and distributed it into the screen. And she's manipulating it with her fingers to make it evenly distributed within the mold itself. So she gets it to a point where she feels like it's evenly distributed. And it was a weighed out amount of pulp. It was a specific amount to make a specific size sheet. She's got a few bubbles in there, and so next she'll take this blue it was a wooden dowel, and rolls it to remove the bubbles and to smooth the sheet. Then she's got a brace that she uses to ensure that the sides of the mold don't pull in as she's removing it from the water. And right now she's allowed the mold to float onto the surface of the water, so it's just whatever surface tension is inside the mold. The paper is made on the inside of the mold, unlike Western style where we make it on the outside of the mold so that we can couch it onto a felt. They make it on the inside of the mold because it always dries on the screen. So they have to have an amazingly large number of screens on the go to be able to make the kind of paper that they do. And many paper houses make 300 to 350 sheets a day. So they have, 300-400 molds available to them. So it's a really large outlay of resources to get a paper house going. There it is draining, so she gradually wedged it up and allows it to drain over top of the little vat, and you can kind of see what the dimensions of the vat are in this shot. And then they stand them up on the wall, against the wall, to drain. And what she did before she put it to drain or to dry, she turned it around backwards so that the back of the cloth on which the paper is attached was facing out, and she put a dry piece of cloth on the back to wick some of the moisture out of the paper, and then removed that, turned it around, and left it to dry. And so that's the person in the middle is my partner. The woman on the left is one of the nieces who spoke a little bit of English, and that's the niece's mother, the sister of Dothithi, who was doing the demonstration.
Is that the natural color of the...
That's the natural color of the paper. It's a really warm, kind of orangey brown color.
The rolling that she does when it's in the mold flat, does that cause the damage?
Is this the natural color of the fiber after it's been
After it's been retted and cooked. Now we've moved, the next day we decided to go, Dothithi, as her niece told us about a village, and actually it's in the Koretsky's book as well, called Sagang, and there are actually 2 or 3 villages, and Yangon, where there are a number of paper makers, and where they used to send their pulp. They used to ret the fiber in those vats in their yard, and then they would send all of the retted fiber to Dung Ma and have some people there beat it for them, and then they would send it back and they would form the sheets in Mandalay. Now Dothithi is doing that herself as well. She has people doing the pulp making as well. But we decided that we wanted to go and see the people in Dung Ma because they were doing some of this as well. And this is the village before Dung Ma, so we stopped there. And these women were actually breaking down, they were recycling cardboard with a stamping mill. So she's got some old cardboard, it's been dampened, and they're stamping it with the stamping mill. But this is the same mill that they use for doing their rice straw. And this is one of the paper houses where they make rice straw paper, which is also used in the gold beating process. And it's also used as a wrapping and packaging material. So here's the stamping mill. These 2 women stand on the end of this seesaw, and the thing goes up, and the woman that's squatting shoves the stuff under there a little bit more where she wants it, and the mill comes down and pounds it. Pretty simple operation, but it's very effective, and it's very heavy. Whoops, it's not dropping. So they are stepping on it, and then it goes down. This is the urns that she rets the straw in, rice straw. So this is rice straw paper. It only rets for about a week, so much easier to break down than the bamboo. And then this is the cooker that she uses. So it's basically been formed out of sort of a wattle and daub kind of a construction. It's woven. It's kind of a woven bamboo cylinder that's all been mudded, and because it's been heated so many times, it's become ceramic basically. And she builds a fire here in the front, and it draws through and heats. I think the chimney is in front, but it creates enough heat in the mass of that mud, packed and dried mud, that it allows this to boil. And she cooks the rice straw for about 2 days, 48 hours. Then it's beaten in that stamping mill, and here she is forming some sheets. This was a much faster process than watching the bamboo paper makers. The rice straw, they don't take quite as much care. They make much thicker sheets. It's used for an entirely different purpose, and therefore it's quite a lot thicker. And the sheets are quite a bit smaller as well. You can see the condition of her molds. They have lots of holes in them. They aren't in particularly good shape, but all of the paper that's made here is cut into 6-inch squares. And so if there's a little bit of a spot where there's a hole, it doesn't really matter that much. They just recycle that back into the next batch.
What do they use it for?
It's used as outer packing on the packets that they're using for pounding the gold leaf. So they'll layer the gold leaf with the bamboo paper, and then on the outside they'll put rice straw paper as a cushioning around the outside before it goes into the leather pouch to be pounded. And it's also used in packaging it when they're shipping it to various places. So they protect it. It's sort of like styrofoam. It's the protective outer wrapping that's used in packaging lots of things, but mainly it seems to be in the gold leaf production. So there's a collection of her molds. She's got quite a lot of them standing around. And this paper is also burnished. And here are the women who are doing the burnishing. So they take these two sticks, which you can see on either side of the woman in blue, either side of her knees, and they're quite a hard wood of some name that we didn't recognize, so some kind of local tree, but fairly hard. And they burnish, they basically pound back and forth in a kind of a cross-hatching motion. You can just kind of barely make out a cross-hatch kind of a pattern on some of that paper that one's on this, it's a little iron plate, that a slightly convex iron plate that she pounds it on. And it creates this cross-hatched pattern, and it compresses the fiber quite a bit compared to the raw sheet, which is really quite rough and lumpy and sort of like quite bad grade construction paper. Once it's compressed, it's quite a lot smoother. And they add a bit of oil. They sort of put a little bit of oil on the sticks as they're pounding to also help with the compression. It's pounded dry, completely dry, so they don't dampen it. And this is my friend. She was having a go at trying to pound things, but our knees are too big, and we're not used to squatting, so we had a terrible time. I tried it too, and I really couldn't get into the rhythm.
Is all the work done outside?
Almost everything is done outside, and usually under some kind of a roof like this. There's very little that's done indoors. It's actually quite pleasant working out in the yard. There's usually some kind of a nice breeze. We found, especially in the afternoon, there's a really nice little breeze comes up and makes it quite cool. It's about, it was in the sort of low 30s, 30 degrees, 32 degrees, somewhere around there. We were quite hot. They all seemed to be quite comfortable. So here's some women also in another part of the yard beating the paper. You can see this woman in the blue skirt is sitting on a little wooden block. We found that quite commonly happened, that they would have just a little wooden block that they kind of squatted and rested on, just to give them a little bit more support. And they just sit there pounding away. This is much, I thought this was much preferred to the next place that we went where they were pounding paper, because these women are sort of, you can hear this thunk, 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 pounding kind of sound from, you know, hundreds of yards away. You can tell you're coming to a paper making house because you can hear the pounding. It's a very characteristic kind of sound. This is in Dong Ma, and we're now going to the home of Hutin Shui. And he has a number of members of his family who ret bamboo for him, and this is his son-in-law's home, where we were taken first. It's it's lime and water. So just a really basic lime and water. They ret it in that, and they cook it in that. So here it's been retting for a while, and again, 3 years seems to be a fairly standard period of time for retting. This is the trough, and they're just getting ready to light the fire. So these vats have been, these are ones that are made particularly for cooking. They don't use the same ones. They'll take the retted material out, put it into these vats with more water and fresh lime, and put them over top of this trench and light a fire underneath it. So that's how this particular house did their cooking. And they started the fire up so that we could have a look. So it just cooks away there for 48 hours, and they just keep feeding the fire. And then once it's cooked, it goes into this little kind of a little building, and it's pounded in two different ways. The hammer that you see to his right, laying on the ground, is the first one, and it's quite a convex shape to it with a very, very hard center, and that's used initially just to break up the fiber. It's still quite stringy looking, and they break it up with that for a while. And then they pound it with these mallets. And they work it a lot more, and eventually they get it into a sort of this mat that they are able to actually roll into a sheet. It holds together, and they every so often flick it with a little thing with water. I think that to his right, sort of back a little ways, just in front of that post, you can see a thing that looks like a little fan or a little feathered duster or something. That's what he was using. He'd dip that in water and he'd just sort of flick it onto the material that he was pounding. And gradually it sort of starts to congeal into this sheet that he's then able to roll up. They beat this for 75 days. No, let me just check this. They beat it for 2 hours, 70 times. That's what it was. For 2 hours, and each batch gets beaten 2 hours, but it gets beaten 70 times. So it takes a long time for it to get to this stage. This is almost done. This batch, he actually, when he finished, while we were there, he finished pounding this one. They put it in some water to soak for a while. Usually it soaks for 3 hours, but they were going to do a demonstration for us, so they didn't let it soak that long. Once it's a lot more hydrated, they put it into this mortar and pestle and pound it ordinarily for 3,000 strokes to smooth and remove any final lumps that are in this material. Then they spread it onto this concrete pad, a polished concrete surface, wet it down, and by his left hand you can see a curved thing. It's a deer antler that's been smoothed off, obviously from years of working, and he takes it in, it's sort of a semicircular thing, he takes it in both hands and rubs this material on the surface of this concrete to smooth it out even more. There you can see the deer antler on the right. And then they form it into these balls and weigh them. So each one is weighed to a particular weight. Then they take it, and here he's setting up the mold into the vat. See, it's wedged down very similarly to the one that Dautithi used in Mandalay. And this is his stirring implement, which I thought was quite neat. So he scooped a bit of water out of the tray and put the pulp and the water into that little urn. And then he puts the knobby end of that in and just rotates his hands around it, and that agitates the pulp and hydrates it enough to break it down or distribute it enough in the water so that it doesn't form lumps. And then he used basically the same kind of hand motions, distributing the pulp quite evenly. And then usually there was a hand motion that they did with the back of their hand on the surface of the water, which I think seemed to fill in little holes and things like that that you could see in the pulp, although it was very difficult to see in this pulp. It's very, very fine. Then the same process, used a dowel and rolled the sheet onto the screen. And there's the brace, and he's allowing it to float. Then similarly, he didn't use a cloth to absorb any of the moisture off the back of it. He left it quite a while over top of the vat, and then eventually it would go out to the yard to dry. This is a finished dry sheet that they pulled off. Actually, I bought that one. And they pulled a few of them off while we were there and showed us the next step. And this is quite difficult to see, but one of the women is sanding this big sheet of paper with a piece of crocus cloth, basically. They didn't know what they called it, but it was basically a piece of crocus cloth. And so she was just doing a sort of a quick, light sanding over this whole sheet of paper. Then she cut the paper into 6-inch squares, roughly, 6-inch squares, and you can see it's the same color. It's that sort of, there's the crocus cloth. She's got a big pair of scissors and a knife that she was using for cutting. And then following that, she got this cushion out and a sharp razor with a slightly concave edge to it. And she placed each sheet onto this cushion and shaved it. to remove any large particles that were not absolutely flat. So any place where there was a little lump or something that didn't get broken down enough or it wasn't beaten finely enough, it was nicked out. Then they put 10 sheets at a time into water and soaked them for about an hour, and then they interleaved them in these tea towels, I would call them, pieces of cloth, and allowed them to dry until they were just barely damp. This paper, the bamboo paper, is beaten on the same kind of slightly convex plates, but these ones are made out of brass. And I think the wood is a different kind of wood that's used for this, and there is no oil or anything applied to the paper. It's beaten damp, which compresses the fibers. Then it's allowed to dry till it's almost totally dry, and then it's beaten again, which changes the texture of the paper so that it is like wax paper. And I have some examples. I have some pieces of it up here that you can look at later. But it becomes transparent and an amazing color, and it is so smooth, which is what allows it to be used in the gold beating process, because absolutely nothing would ever stick to this paper. When she was doing this process, the first beating, when it was still damp, if there was a hole in the sheet from where she shaved and nicked a little chunk out because it was too rough, she would have another sheet there that was sort of a feeder sheet, and she would just pull a little piece off of that and patch the hole with the beating motion and just compress the fiber together and make a little patch so that it became a completely smooth piece of paper. This room that they're in is a little cellar, a little concrete cellar built specifically for this purpose. In most of them, this one I think has a concrete floor. One of the other ones we were in had a wooden floor, and there was actually water underneath the wooden supports, the wooden flooring. There was water underneath, because the idea is to have a very humid, very airless kind of environment to do this work in. And the noise was deafening, absolutely deafening, because there were at least 4 people in here pounding on those brass plates with these pieces of wood, and it was amazingly deafening. In Mandalay at Datithi's house, they had a similar little cellar where there were a bunch of young women in there pounding paper. And I had a couple of pairs of those little foam earplugs, which I gave to them for them to use, because I just couldn't imagine spending days and days sitting in there pounding with that kind of noise. This is the woman that was doing the demonstration of the shaving and the pounding, and me and my friend. And there's the steps. There you can see a young person on the right-hand side going down into the little concrete cellar where the beating happens. The fellow that took the picture stood on the other side of the trench where the pots were cooking, so we look like we're in a cloud of smoke, because we weren't, but there was a cloud of smoke in between us and the camera. After we left that area, the Mandalay area, we moved over towards Inle Lake, which is up in a more mountainous region of Myanmar, and much moister, much more of a gardening and produce production area. And this is a market in the town of Shui Yang near Inle Lake. And we spent a few days there looking at the canals and the lake and enjoying some of the local hospitality there. Dried fish is a staple of the diet in Myanmar. And you can see just where that woman is walking on the upper left, a stack of white things. Those are rice crackers made from rice flour, and they're one of the most popular snack foods in Myanmar. The other thing that's interesting is these sort of in the third basket, it looks like little bundles of wood. There's a kind of wood that's used in cooking that gives a kind of a bitter taste to the dishes. In many cultures in Southeast Asia, they like food to have sweet, sour, salty, and bitter, all of those flavors in the same dish. And so they have different ways of getting the bitter taste, and one of them is a bitter gourd that's used. And the other one is this wood, this bark, which when I accidentally bit into a piece of it, tasted like turpentine to me. But it's quite commonly used in Myanmar and in Laos in cooking. Some more of the market area. Then we traveled to a community called Pindaya. Pindaya is mainly famous for a cave temple that has 800 Buddhas in it. But we knew that there were paper makers there, and Pindaya is also a place where in Myanmar there are many parasol factories in Pindaya, so that was part of the reason for our going there. The material that they use in this area of Myanmar is sa, paper mulberry, and they don't, they're not very particular about cleaning it and scraping it very vigorously, because it's mainly used in the production of other things. So it's not used as paper for paper's sake. It's used as covering for our umbrellas, where it gets painted over with something else anyway, or various things like that. It's used a bit for wrapping paper, and we did find lots of mulberry sheets that were being used for wrapping paper, things like that. Traditionally, though, mulberry paper was made for offerings to Buddha, and one of the main things that was offered to Buddha was cannabis, and opium. So in many small villages, especially in rural areas in Laos, where people are still living very traditionally, when we asked what the purpose of the paper was, that was the purpose. It was to wrap the opium in to make an offering to Buddha. In this particular village, it's mainly used for parasols, and it is used for sort of decorative sheets. They do lots of decorative sheets with bougainvillea petals in them. So this young fellow is demonstrating pounding the pulp. It was all pounded by hand there, as you can see, on a big rock. They had other people that collected the branches for them, but they would then strip the bark off the mulberry branches and cook it for about 24 to 48 hours, depending on how tough it seemed to be and how dried out it was. And then it was rinsed and beaten. In this village, they used a trough system for vats. So rather than having a vat that you stood up with, these troughs were built into the ground. And you could lay a number of molds into the trough, and it was filled with water, and there was a drain at one end. This is Ma Tu, and this is her trough. At this end, there's a well with a drain that runs from the long trough into that well. And she plugs the drain with a chunk of rag in a stick or something, and then dips the water out of the well and into the vat, into the trough, until it's sufficiently deep. It's sloped slightly towards the well end. And then when it's sufficiently deep at the far end, she stops and lays out all her molds. Her daughter is actually helping here, and so she's positioning all the molds. And they weigh them down with those rocks that you can see on the edges of the trough. So they don't have wedges, they just sort of set some rocks on them. And her molds are made out of bamboo, so they're slit sections of bamboo wedged or tied together, and they have cotton muslin of some kind on them. There she is forming her sheets. She sort of leans this board across the center so that she can reach to the far side. The sheets are a little bit thicker, a little more rustic, much more rustic than the bamboo paper makers who are making things for a very precise purpose. But Matu can make a lot of sheets in a very short period of time. There's the same kind of stirring kind of action. She's got the pulp in the little bucket. She's stirring it with one of those knobbed tools. These people spoke no English whatsoever. Their son could count a little bit or knew a few numbers in English. And we knew a few numbers in Burmese, so we were able to ask questions at least, you know, how long, with a lot of sign language and a lot of gesturing and motioning and, you know, staring at things and suggesting numbers until we finally were able to find out roughly how long it took to do things like cooking and retting and all of that. There's her yard where she stands all the sheets up to dry. And they just lean against each other, and there she is with her family. She had a copy of, she was one of the papermakers that Elaine and Donna Koretsky visited, and she had a copy of their book. And when I mentioned their name, she was very excited and ran and got the book and showed it to me and showed me her picture in the book. She was quite thrilled to meet somebody who knew their name, and it seemed like there was some kind of a connection there, so that was quite interesting. She was a very sweet woman. And we bought some paper from her. The next thing we did was go over to sort of a few blocks over in the same town to the parasol makers. And this woman kindly did a little demonstration. She basically made one while we were sitting there watching. So she's, her husband cuts all the spines out of bamboo for her and makes holes in them. All of this is done totally by hand. And there's the paper. She's applying the paper to the bamboo spines. We bought 2 parasols from her, and she thought that we had ones that didn't have very nice handles on them, so she had her husband go out onto his lathe, this is his lathe, and make us a new handle that was nicer. So he cut the old one off and made us a new one that was fancier with more tooling on it, and more routing and stuff, and then showed us how he attached them, and all with pegs, and they spoke very little English. But he basically has a bamboo pipe on the bottom and a rope that's attached around the thing that spins the piece of wood that he's working on. And it comes up to a sort of this bow kind of a thing. It's another bamboo piece that's stuck into a tube, and it comes up and just ends above his head there. And as he steps on the bamboo thing under his foot, because of the way the cord is wrapped around the pipe that he's working on, it causes the thing to turn. And it doesn't turn always in the same direction. It goes back and forth. It goes sort of back and forth, back and forth. But it worked very effectively. He had a nice sharp tool and cut us a really nice little handle. Here's the kids. They kind of got into the action, decided to do a little demonstration of pounding the pulp for us. So they were very sweet. And you can see her trough vat there to the left.
Kathy, is there any sizing that goes on the paper?
No, it's all water leaf. It's got no sizing whatsoever.
Oh, these are just sun umbrellas.
Yeah. What happens with the umbrellas, they do leave some of them with the natural just the natural paper kind of finish on them. Sometimes they paint a design on them. Some of the umbrellas, though, they're coating with, they're dyeing them with something like that persimmon kind of a stuff. And some of them they're waxing. They're putting some kind of a wax coating on them so that they do become water impermeable. And the ones that we bought have that coating on them, and they're quite a bit larger than the one that she made. The one that we bought was probably about 2.5 feet in diameter. It's quite a large one, and it's painted green, and I had one that was also sort of that a dark rusty red kind of a color. Now this is in Thailand. We've sort of moved out of Myanmar and into Thailand, and we're going around. We knew that there were some paper mills in the northern part of Thailand, near Lampang. And so we went to Lampang, not really knowing for sure who we were going to find or what we were looking for. But I had, at some point, a couple of years before that, purchased a small book that said it was made in Thailand and it was made at the Idin paper mill. But no address, no particular community even mentioned on that. stayed in a very nice guest house in Lampang, and we mentioned to the owner of the guest house that we were looking for people, we were interested in paper makers, and we were looking for people making paper. And he said, oh, well, he had a friend that made paper, and he would take us over to his friend's place. So he did that and took along some bicycles so that we could make our own way back. And we get over to his friend's place, and sure enough, it's in paper mill. So by an absolute fluke, we managed to find the very place I'd been looking for and didn't have a clue where it was. This is, he's growing some paper mulberry in his yard, so this is one of the paper mulberry plants. Paper mulberry grows in, like some other bushes that we have here, plums and things. It has a male plant and a female plant, and you have to get both of them in the same yard in order for them to fertilize. So that's one, and this is the other, and I've forgotten now which one's which. And I don't know, Nancy, do you know? No, okay. I think this is the female and the other one is the male, but I'm not positive about that. So, but they're really attractive plant, really beautiful shaped leaves, very distinctive. So you know, they wouldn't be too hard to find if you were out looking for them. No, the this plant, the male plant, has pretty much arrow-shaped leaves, sort of a arrow kind of a shape. The female plant has, well, it looks like there are some leaves that are just the arrow-shaped, but they get this distinctive little pattern on the leaf, which is quite interesting. This paper mill is owned by a man named Supan Promser, and he was quite happy to spend quite a bit of time with us talking about paper making. He has quite a large operation. He has about 9 staff who work there with him. There are 3 or 4 women whom he's taught the sheet formation to, and they make beautiful paper here. I would say it was the best quality paper that I saw anywhere in Southeast Asia, and far better quality than the export quality Thai paper that comes to Canada. He doesn't export paper in flat sheets very often. Most of his paper is made into products, into books or various other kinds of things. He doesn't sell it very much because he hasn't found a market, I guess, in North America for just flat sheets. There's so much other Thai paper being sold, and it's probably a lot cheaper than his. There's the saw that's being cut up into lengths for soaking and cooking. This is my friend. She was stirring the vat. This is the cooking pots, and there was a good quantity of bark cooking away there. This is a soaking vat, actually. They soak it first to soften it up before they put it into the cooking pots. And then once it's cooked, it's sorted. And he was in the process of filling an order for a German company who was ordering wedding albums. So he was wanting completely white fiber. And this woman was in charge of picking the specks out of the fiber to make sure that there was nothing dark in it. And he was also bleaching it. So this is bleached. Now, he wasn't using a Cloroxy kind of bleach. He was using something else, but I don't remember what it was, and I don't know if I wrote it down. He also often uses sheets of the bark. The one that Ivana is holding up is a piece of bark that's been sort of stretched out, and he sometimes stretches those out and dries them and uses them as covering material on various kinds of books, so sort of a decorative kind of covering material. But it's extremely nice fiber. This is his pulp wall. Supan uses Hollander beaters to beat his mulberry. And he has 3 Hollander beaters, fairly small ones. But he basically, when he thinks the pulp is about ready, he usually scoops a little handful out of it and throws it on the wall. And this is his pulp wall. So all the different shades and tones. He does a fair amount of mixing to get various colors. And he does mix banana fiber and some bamboo, various other kinds of things. Sometimes does inclusions of leaves and things like that. But he does a lot of just plain kind of, see if I can get that one to drop better. This is one of his master paper makers who's getting ready to form a sheet in one of his vats. And you can see it's a similar kind of process, bamboo frames. They're fairly inexpensive to make actually out of bamboo, but they don't last as long as the wooden ones. The ones that Da Tithi and Utin Shui were using were wooden frames. More expensive to make, but they last longer. These are much cheaper to make. And there she is patting the surface to distribute the pulp. And then once the sheet is formed, they do a smoothing technique. They take a small, this is actually a silver bowl, a small silver bowl with a rolled edge, so it has a very, very smooth edge. And once the paper has drained for a particular period of time, didn't seem to have any particular sense to me of how long that would be. She just knew when it was ready. And then she would take this bowl and rub it over the surface of the sheet while it's still on the cloth, and basically remove some of the water and polish the surface of the sheet at the same time. It was quite amazing. His paper really is just gorgeous. And as she'd go down, she'd sort of flick some of the water out of the bowl and then continue along. So it was quite an amazing process. They were also making Western style paper there. And the Koretsky's have also often go here. Supan was telling us that they've been coming once a year, usually not as a paper making tour, but as an artist's tour. They bring artists to his paper mill and they spend a week doing paper casting, making sheets, and making art from cast paper and pulp. And so she's got a very nice mold and decal, and she's actually forming Western style sheets. She's got a pile of them couched behind her arm there. And this paper that she was doing was a combination of mulberry and bamboo. There's Ivana. She's trying to make a sheet of paper. We suspect that they probably threw ours back after we left because they weren't very even. It's a very challenging process. It was really difficult for us to get the motion that would allow the pulp to distribute evenly. It would take a lot of practice to be able to do that. They use this motion with the back of their hand of just sort of patting the surface of the water, which was some aid in distributing the pulp, although it didn't work very well for either of us. And there's her drying sheet standing there. And as I said, it was a bit thin in a few spots. I suspect that they threw it back. And there's his drying area. You can see that these are very white sheets, much whiter than Ma Tu, who was making, basically using the same material, but hers wasn't bleached, and this is bleached. This is sort of the studio space, so lots of molds laying around, and you can see the drying area out in the outside, and a few of the artworks. This is ones that he just had hanging in the studio space that were left by the people that had been there the last year. There's his, the women were actually packing books. I didn't see them actually doing any of the binding. Most of these are the two forms that he uses are either an accordion fold of various sizes. Lots of them are quite a tall and thin, narrow book. And these are all stab bound. They don't have very effective hinges, so they don't open as well as I would like, anyhow. I bought a book in Bangkok to use as a journal, and I found myself frustrated a lot with the lack of flexibility in hinges. So I didn't buy any of those books from him, but I bought 3 or 4 of his accordion structures because they're very nice books with beautiful paper. These had a covering that had floral inclusions in them, so they were, and these were being shipped. Actually, there's someone in Montreal who orders things from him, finished products from him, and he has a number of customers in Germany and Holland. Now this is in a parasol factory near Chiang Mai in San Kampang. They make paper there as well for coating the parasols, and this is the beating area. You can see the little mallets and some of the saw that's been partly beaten there, and I stuck a piece of bark onto the top of that one post just for a demonstration, or just for the photo. No, some of these aren't dropping very well. Here's the vat that they're using, and they're using a much smaller mold to make their sheets. And they do it in much more a Western style, although they don't couch them, but they allow them to dry on the mold, but they basically dip and lift. And so she's agitating the pulp, and then she basically dips it. They don't use a decal, they just catch the fiber on the mold. And there's the finished product coming off. They don't use a decal, I guess, because they're using, again, the inside of the mold, so it's got a natural decal on it. Darn. There's their paper drying out in the yard. And there's some of the parasols. The big one is made from canvas. But in this workshop, they not only made the parasols, but they had a whole little group of artists who were there painting them, painting designs on them. And when tourists came to this factory, you could give them your backpack or your hat or whatever you wanted, and they would paint a little design on it for you as well, for whatever you cared to donate. We probably donated enough that was worth their full day's wage of what they would ordinarily have been paid for their day's work, for the 10 minutes that it took to paint the orchid on my hat. Then just outside where the parasols were being made, there was this just very small little house where these young women were making paper that was dyed blue. It's paper mulberry, and they were adding inclusions. And this kind of paper is sold in Chiang Mai in the markets for wrapping paper and various coverings for books and things like that that are made there. We traveled north from Chiang Mai, and this is in the area near Taton. This is we were on our way by bicycle 9 miles from our guest house. There's a village called Ban Mai. It's actually a weaving village, but we'd heard that there was a paper maker there and actually a bookbinder, we'd been told. And so we went off in search of this fellow. And this is just some of what the land is like around there. Quite hilly, mountainous. This is the area where a lot of the what they call the hill tribes live, the Aka people. And these are little grain storage kind of mounds, little stooks. This is the home of the paper maker and bookbinder. He wasn't home, but there were some women in his yard who spoke no English whatsoever, who didn't seem to mind that we came in to have a look around. And you can see that it's, again, paper mulberry, distinctive looking bark that they're using. You can see the big pile of firewood behind there that's used to fire this 45-gallon drum in which they cook the saw. And those are the soaking vats. There's all their paper drying. This group of women seem to do the sheet formation in the morning and then have the paper ready by sort of late morning to dry all afternoon, and then in the afternoon they do the beating. So they beat pulp in the afternoon for the next morning's sheet production. So they were busy beating pulp rather than forming sheets. This is in Mesai, and this is the village market. It was quite a large market in Mesai. It started at 5 a.m. and it's over by 8. And we stayed in, you can see there's a couple of baskets on a ledge, and there's a couple of windows above those baskets, and one of those windows was our room. After Mesai, we traveled along to Chiang Khong, which is on the Mekong River across from Laos. This is Hue Zai, the town in Laos that's across from Chiang Khong. And we traveled by a little shuttle boat over here to take a riverboat down the Mekong River to Luang Prabang. And the boat that we were in was sort of about the size of the one second from the right, the smallest one. You could take a speedboat. Our boat took 2 days to go to Luang Prabang. You could take a speedboat that got there in about 6 hours, but you were deaf by the time you got there on the speedboat. So we decided that we wanted to save our hearing as much as possible. That's Chiang Khong, and actually that sort of tallest of the terraced buildings was the guest house that we stayed in. Our boat trip took 2 days, so we had to stop for overnight in a town called Pak Beng. And we actually ended up spending 3 days there because my friend got sick. And we were not able to travel the day we were supposed to, which gave me the opportunity to do quite a lot of wandering around the town because she was sick and she was laying down and being sick, and I was out looking for doctors and things like that in this tiny little village. And what did I come upon but a bunch of sawbark being loaded into a truck. So the hills in this area, and this is a very mountainous region, is a prime growing place for paper mulberry. And they do a lot of harvesting. Many people earn their livelihood harvesting paper saw and shipping it to Chiang Mai, to Thailand, upriver, where it's made into paper. There doesn't seem to be a very large paper making culture in Laos, other than in another area which is over closer to Thailand. This is the Golden Triangle, so this is sort of on the Lao-Thai-Burmese border, very close to the Lao-Thai-Burmese border. And paper making doesn't seem to be a part of the culture here, but on the east side of Laos, there was more paper making, and that's where I found people making paper for Buddha. This is one of the boats. This is the boat we didn't go on because my friend was sick, and so we were. I went to wave off the folks that we had ridden with the day before, and lo and behold, there was the paper mulberry bark waiting to be loaded onto a boat to go to Chiang Mai. It was about 27 degrees that morning. It was a little bit cooler in the morning than it was in the afternoon, when it would get up to about 35. But these fellows were all wearing their warm jackets because they were quite cool at 27 degrees. I was in shorts. Or I think actually I probably had a skirt on in this area. So there's the truckloads of mulberry being loaded onto the boat. They carry them down and sort of into the hold of these larger cargo boats and take it upriver, and when they come back, they bring goods back from Thailand back down to the villages along the river. This is the daughter of the owner of our guest house, and she entertained us. She was a lot of fun, and she actually, this bush, you can't really get a very good look at them. There are some little seed things on this bush. They're a little stem with a round little thing on the bottom, and they've got kind of a pointed little knob on the bottom of the seed. And she showed us that they were tops, and she would break them off and come and spin them for us. And she kept us quite entertained. She was quite a dear little thing. Then we went further downriver to Luang Prabang, and lo and behold, there's more mulberry bark being loaded onto some boat to go someplace. However, in Luang Prabang and in that area, there is in the actual town of Luang Prabang, there is a fellow who is using locally made paper to produce lanterns and various products to sell. He doesn't do books, mainly sells wrapping paper and paper lanterns and things like that. He actually knows Supan Promser and sells Supan's books in his shop. And we spent some time visiting with him, and he told us about this family whom he's just helped to set up as a paper-making house. So we went to visit them and got a little demonstration and bought a few books from them. So they're basically, you know, the stone and the hammers and the pot of saw bark. And they mostly put inclusions in their paper, bougainvillea or various other kinds of leaves. But they also showed us a fairly unique drying system made out of woven bamboo, which I thought was quite interesting. So they've got some of, because they were actually making some books, this family. They were making a small accordion-style book. The cover of that had a piece of woven cloth in a window panel in the front of the book, which was quite interesting. And they were also using woven bamboo like this as cover boards. So they would weave the bamboo, use it as boards, cover it with the paper, and then stab bind it onto the book. And some of them they had actually just attached to the fly leaf, I guess, to an end paper, kind of just an end paper attachment to the boards. So that was kind of interesting to see various different ways of using the paper. That's sort of the end of the paper making, but I thought you might be interested in a few of the temples. Luang Prabang is a World Heritage Site. The whole town is a World Heritage Site because, in part, of the many monasteries and temples that are in this community and that have been so well preserved. And they're actually beautiful works of art. The ornate decoration that occurs on these temples is just stunning. This is the porch of this temple, and the gold bit at the back where the doorway is all carved wood, and then covered. It's actually painted, and all of the pillars are stenciled with gold. It's quite stunning. This is another temple. This is probably one of the more famous ones, the main temple, and the Tree of Life there is a glass mosaic. The royal palace in Luang Prabang, which was the original palace of the royalty of Laos, the throne room, it's a museum now, and the throne room is entirely, all the walls are this same red glass mosaic. It's kind of a red painted surface with all this glass inlaid into it, and it's scenes of village life that's sort of covers all the walls in the throne room in the royal palace. This is the funerary temple, and there's a great big funerary boat inside that's used on the river, and beautiful carving. Gives you some sense of the connections between Hinduism and Buddhism. This is Rama and Sita, very common icons in the Buddhist religion. And many of the temples, we also visited Cambodia and went to Angkor Wat, and many of the temples in the Angkor period were started off as Hindu temples and became sort of more of a local form of Buddhism as they evolved. And that's the end of the slides. And I do have, maybe I'll let Anne turn the lights on. I've got a few samples of paper up here. And Sheila also brought a few newsletters from the Dart Hunter, Friends of Dart Hunter newsletters, which Cabbage does a newspaper exchange with. So that's, I certainly answer any more questions if people have them, and I'll just hold up a piece of this paper and show you. This is the pounded, this is the burnished bamboo paper, and it is transparent. It's amazing. And you'd swear it was wax paper. It's just so amazingly smooth. And I saw them making it, and they didn't put anything on it. It was burnished, that's all. It's quite an amazing process. And it was certainly an amazing privilege to be able to go and visit those people and receive their hospitality and learn so much from them. So, and thank you very much. So, questions? Betsy had her hand.
Kathy, do they use the same dispersion?
Nothing. It was really just water and the pulp. They used no formation aid. They didn't put anything else into it. It was quite astonishing. It's really very primitive. You know, sort of no aids, no additives whatsoever that I could tell.
And is there nothing added in the wrecking process on there? Is that
Just the lime and water.
lime and water?
Yeah, lime and water. Nancy.
I'm wondering about the water, what the sources were,
Most,
the condition of the
yeah. Most of it, as near as we could tell, most of it was stream water from streams flowing through the landscape. We didn't, I mean, Myanmar especially is a very dry country, especially in the areas where they were making this paper. It's dry and dusty, very much like where I come from, Saskatchewan. And there was no particular, like there weren't a lot of streams. The Irrawaddy River, which is the main water source for most of Myanmar, is quite a muddy looking river. It's not a very clear river at all. We did go on a boat up it, and it's not particular. I mean, it's not polluted because there's no industry. So I don't think there's very much in terms of chemical kind of contamination of the water. But I don't think it's, you know, I didn't see them filtering it or anything like that. It seemed to be being used pretty much straight as it was. And in many places it's the same water they're drinking. If there's any sediment in it, they let it settle out to drink, but they weren't doing anything that I could see in particular to make it pure or anything like that. It was pretty...
The quantity they're churning out in a morning,
Mm-hmm.
they must be amazingly fast at the sheet formation.
The,
It looks like
yeah.
it's so labor intensive.
The sheet formation with the bamboo paper took longer. It was appreciably longer to form one of those sheets because they were aiming for perfection. I bought, just to give you a sense, the sheet that I bought was, I can't remember how big it is. It's sort of, I don't know, 4 feet by 2 feet, something like that. And it, I paid $12 for that sheet of paper. Now that's an enormous amount of money in Myanmar. What can I use? I'm trying to think of what would be an example. To take a trishaw, little public conveyance kind of things. They have fellows with a bicycle with a little sidecar kind of seat built onto the side. That's the main form of transport. Most people don't use cars because gas is rationed. So it's very expensive. Well, it cost us $15 to hire a man and a car to drive out to the village where we went to find trishaw guys to take us to the other villages. That was $15 for most of a day. With a fellow who actually came along to interpret. He wasn't intended to do that. His job was to take us to a particular place and drop us off there, and we were and help us maybe negotiate with the trishaw guys to get us to the village. And he spoke some English. He was so fascinated with what we were going to go try to do that he wanted to come along because he'd never known anybody that had ever done this before. He didn't know anything about the paper makers or anything like that. And he was so fascinated that he came along. And so he turned into our interpreter. And so we were able to get a lot more information from the village people in Yangon and Dang Ma than we had in any of the other places, because we had someone who spoke the local language and who translated everything for us, which was a remarkable benefit to us. But that was $15 for a day, and one sheet of that paper was $12. So that sort of gives you a sense of how valuable that paper is, and so they can afford to take a little bit longer to make those sheets very, very perfect, and to spend all the time that it took. Like, it's an amazingly labor-intensive process to ret the stuff and to cook it for hours and to beat it for hours and hours and hours and hours, and then to beat it again for hours and hours and hours after it's formed. So it's just, it takes days and days to make a sheet of that paper, and it's very valuable. Whereas the, yeah, whereas the saw paper is a much faster process. Well, it doesn't have to ret at all. You soak it and you cook it, and then you rinse it and then you beat it, and you can do the whole thing in two or 3 days. It's not the sort of long-term investment that requires somebody to sort of think about how long their family is going to need to do this to be able to sort of recover what they've invested in all of the materials and all of the stuff that they've done 3 years in advance to get ready to make paper. So, even when I was buying from the gold beaters, I bought some of these sheets that I think they sold me ones that they thought were too wrinkled to use anymore, which was fine with me. I'm not going to use them to beat gold anyway. And I did buy a couple of pieces that actually have a gold leaf in between them. So I've got that if somebody wants to see it, but I didn't want to have it out fluttering around. But this was $1 in sort of the equivalent of $1 US. 300.
It's an appreciable
Yeah.
part
Whereas,
of the cost in gold beating or in making umbrellas, the paper itself.
yeah, definitely. This is the rice straw paper, and as you can see, it's a much different kind of texture, but you can see the cross-hatching from the beating process on that. And some paper houses want it pink, and some paper houses want it yellow, and so they dye it to suit whatever the customer orders. So if the customer wants pink paper, they make pink paper for them. But it's the same process. It's the rice straw, and it's burnished. And you can see some more pictures in the Koretsky's book, because they actually did quite a lot of. But one of the things that they've done is included a little sample of the burnished paper in the front of the book. So, nice little touch. Any more questions? Yeah. That's okay.
I'm wondering about the fiber. I heard that Thailand has sort of run out of saw paper now, so they're getting it from other countries.
Yes.
Was it grown as a crop, or was it wild?
I suspect in Laos it's wild. I think it's a wild thing. Now, I think it started out wild. I think they're cultivating it now. And in Myanmar, around Pindaya, they're cultivating it. I don't know if it probably occurred wild there too, because that's sort of getting close to the same region. Pindaya is in sort of northeastern Myanmar, and Pakbeng is in sort of northwestern Laos, so they're sort of all in proximity to the Golden Triangle area there. So I would sort of, in terms of the kind of environment that they're in, although Pindaya is not a mountainous region, and the saw seems to grow more readily in a sort of cooler environment, I suspect that it's not very far away that they're able to find it farther up in the hills. But I think in Laos they're now cultivating it as well. It grows very fast, as you probably know from your travels as well. But and it's a very quick crop to grow. You plant it and you can use it right away. Within a year, it's ready to harvest. So it's something that can be grown quite efficiently. I think in Thailand, the difficulty in Thailand with growing mulberry is that there's so much of the arable land there is being taken up by cash crops, by food crops mainly, and a lot still of opium is being grown in those mountains. And in spite of the government's attempts, the Thai government's attempts to put a stop to the opium trade. There's still a lot of it being grown. And, you know, if you're growing opium, you're sure not going to waste your land growing mulberry. You know, it's just not productive to do it. So I think that that's part of the reason that it's not being grown in Thailand so much anymore. There are other things that have taken over. Whereas in Laos, there's lots of wild land still, lots of area that is not inhabited, and it's all forest anyway, so they can allow it to grow and maybe grow more. What's happening there? Betsy?
Where does the gold come from? I mean, they have local sources?
Yeah, they do mine gold in Myanmar, as there's actually quite a large gold mining area in the north. They also mine various gemstones. We bought sapphires and rubies and spinels and various kinds of things. My partner's a geologist, so. I mean, you can buy, you know. Oh, I bought this shirt I bought in Burma. I bought this, should I pay for this? Yes, yeah, this is locally made Burmese cap, and, I think what I paid for this is probably about $3.
On a narrow loom and then joined together, or is that
No,
one
this is
large?
one, this is on a, they have big looms. Okay. Yeah, they use quite